All right, I think we're ready to go. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our 2023 DA Administrators Workshop. My name is Abe Christ from the Performance Office. It's great to see everybody here. We're all business today. No assessment quiz, unfortunately, to start things off like we normally do because we have 98 information-packed slides to cover this afternoon, and we look forward to doing that. We had a successful set of in-person meetings earlier this week and a great virtual meeting earlier this morning, so we hope this webinar goes the same route. It is great to see everybody back. This session is being recorded and it will be posted next week. Also, there should be a PDF of this presentation uploaded into the chat. If it's not there now, I know one of my colleagues will be doing that any minute. And one other thing, please use the Teams chat if you have any questions, and we'll try our best to get to all of them. There's a lot of you on the meeting today, I think almost 100. So if we don't get to them, please follow up with us directly. We will break at several specific points to take audio questions using the raise hand feature. So if you like to do that, we'd love to hear from you and chat with you. I am very fortunate today to be joined by some of my colleagues who will also be presenting, Deirdre Ducharme from the Performance Office and Janet Stuck, and also Jen Cho from Cambium. Also on the call, Christy Alberino is helping behind the scenes and on the chat, and also I believe other colleagues from assessment, Jeff Gregg and Michelle Rosato are also on the call. So thanks to all my colleagues for being on here too. This presentation is very long and a lot of information. So if you need to take a break midstream, please feel free to do that at your own pace. We do not plan on taking any stops during the presentation. Okay, so how does all this work happen that we're about to talk to you about? This is due to our awesome Performance Office team. In short, our office mission is to improve student outcomes through the use of data and technology. This slide here contains all of our team members in the Performance Office, also specifically our student assessment team. Our office does not only student assessment, but EdSite management, data collection, psychometrics, accountability, IT operations, and IT development. A lot goes on here. And as I mentioned, my student assessment colleagues are here as well. Janet Stuck, one special note I didn't mention earlier, Janet Stuck is back from retirement. So Janet, thank you for coming back and assisting us as we make it through another testing window. So, and one other thing too, if you need to contact any of our colleagues here in the office, you can just click on their name here and it will get you their email. Okay, so also from the Cambium team, Jen Cho, as well as Marie Musumeci are here as well. So it's great to have them back. They have been part of our program for many, many years. Cambium Assessment has done a terrific job. We were very grateful to have them back in the mix again this year. So I know Jen will be taking some slides in a little bit. Okay, so presentation overview. What are we going to take on today? First off, we're going to go with our overview of the summative assessments for spring 2023. Then after our overview, we're going to talk a little bit about the Cambium system overview, and then finally the special populations update. Okay, so first thing is how, and this is if you are a new coordinator and only remember one slide today, this is the one. This is who and how you contact people when you have issues during testing. So first off, CSDE Performance Office. When are you going to contact us? If you have any state policy test administration questions, if you're reporting of security breaches, and also if you need to contact us for accommodations or any designated support questions. How are you going to do that? Our number is here, our email is here too. Then Cambium, when are you going to contact the Cambium team? If you have any test administration procedure questions and technology questions, call the Cambium Help Desk, 844-202-7583. they always do a bang up job supporting our districts in Connecticut. So again, an important slide to take home if that's the only thing you take home today. So we always start these updates every year with what remains the same and what is new. So we'll start off with the good news in the sense that what remains the same. There are a lot that does remain the same. So if you are a veteran coordinator, you can kind of lean back on your experience. And if you are a new coordinator, don't panic, you will catch up. So the first thing is TIDE is still being provisioned as the student management system, and uploads will come from PSIS every night in the past. And I'm gonna asterisk some of my comments here too, just because there's an important distinction in a couple places with our College Board testing. And College Board doesn't update every night, and TIDE is a completely different College Board. There's a College Board TIDE, so please be aware of that if you wear two hats in your district. Next thing is office hours. We will be doing office hours again. We'll be doing them every Thursday at 3 p.m. beginning on March 30th and running through the end of testing. Links will be in the Student Assessment News, and we'll be sending out a calendar invite to all DAs, so the office hours invite will appear on your calendar. Importance of maintaining data in PSIS Reg. We will once again be taking data nightly from PSIS registration. It is extremely important that this is maintained locally and updated by your PSIS coordinator as appropriate. If you are a coordinator and have not connected with your PSIS district person, we recommend you do that ASAP. Go buy them a cup of coffee after this meeting and connect with them. Historically, we found that districts that have a tight connection with their DA and their PSIS coordinator, testing generally goes a lot smoother. Ordering of paper materials. You'll be ordering paper materials in TIDE still for Braille and large print. Users can begin to do this on January 27th. We will touch on this a little bit in our subsequent slides. Rolling release of results. Good news, that is back, or that will be back. Generally 10 days after testing has completed, districts will have access to their student results in the centralized reporting system. This will hopefully begin a little earlier this year relative to last year when we did not open things until mid-May. So watch out for communication from us. So you don't have to wait till June 15th to see your results trickling in. This kind of came as a surprise last year to some folks. So just be mindful that these results are going to be appearing very quickly in the centralized reporting system. Test delivery system remains the same. The components that have been successfully implemented over the last few years are back, so that is great news. Our test administration procedures are generally the same. You will see in the test administration manuals that will be arriving later this month that generally speaking all the processes remain the same, and then the tests remain the same. Again, I'm going to throw an asterisk on this one because in the next slide, there is a difference in one of our assessments, the NGSS assessment, that we're going to talk a little bit about. But generally speaking, nothing's changed about Smarter Balanced. Nothing has changed about CTAA and CTOS. In order to measure change, you keep the measuring stick the same. That's what we're doing. Okay, so what else remains the same in 2023? Students in private approved facilities still tested. Students who are with disabilities and or English learners, those students are still tested. And then students in PSIS who attend out-of-state facilities or in-state non-approved facilities, those students are tested. That's a small number of students, so I wouldn't necessarily get too worried about that. We have a resource coming later in the slide deck if you do have instances for students like that. Oops. Okay, so what is new in 2023? Okay, roll the drum roll, please. So I said don't panic earlier, but there is still a lot to learn. So be mindful of the following. Some of these are bigger than others. There are some big chunks of info here though. So the first thing is the integration of CT SEDS with the TIDE system. That's a big advance this year. I know probably every one of you knows about the rollout of CT SEDS as it pertains to the efforts that the Bureau of Special Education has been implementing throughout the state with that new system. The plan is in the future, all data from CTCEDS will be pushed over to TIDE, but for this year, there's somewhat of a segmented approach, only allowing for transfer of finalized IEPs and 504 plans. Please note that, finalized IEP and 504 plans. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is going to be a recurring theme throughout this presentation. We have a new assessment, the KELP. This is an ELP alt assessment administered in the Cambium environment. More information on this is also forthcoming in the slides. The testing window begins on February 1st and continues until March 31st. You might be wondering, why are we intermingling ELP testing with this presentation? But since we are using the Cambium system to deliver this, it's why we are looping you all in as well. You will likely be working with your ELACS, your English Language Assessment Coordinator, to administer this test, so you should be aware of this. Accountability reporting is back. There are no waivers in place this year related to state testing. The full reporting is back after a few years of exemptions due to COVID. Fortunately, we are back. I know in the last 2 years there have been various exceptions, but that is no longer the case. Next up, the early stopping rule process is a new, streamlined, and more efficient process. There has been some information distributed in the Student Assessment News, as well as previous communication. More information on that effort is in the slide deck, but that is a new process, the new ESR process. We also are going to have a teacher training slide deck that is going to be distributed. This has been requested for many years. It is, of course, necessary that you do train your proctors and teachers in your districts, but this is another option to do that. We know that in the past we've distributed this PowerPoint, which we will be, not just in a PDF form, but in a PowerPoint format. But now we also will have a teacher training. We will be sending that to you likely next week with some luck. New manuals, as I mentioned earlier. Procedures are the same for the most part, but we have updated all our manuals here. Pick up a copy. They will be sent to your districts beginning towards the end of this month, so watch out for them for delivery. There is a new secure browser, that is the case every year with our online assessment, so watch out or make sure to be aware of that, that all browsers are updated. Jen Cho from Cambium will be touching on sort of the special distinctions about those. And then finally, I mentioned earlier where I said everything has changed, everything has stayed the same, but not really. The one not really is the Science Computer Adaptive Test. In the past, we used what is known as a LOFT design, a linear on-the-fly test design, where items were not assigned in an adaptive format. Going forward, they will. It will change testing a little bit in the sense it will be made more efficient, but no need to worry that science tests will continue to be equivalent across the years. This is not this does not change the assessment in a substantive way in terms of reporting. This year will be compared to last year and so on and so forth. It's not a new generation. Okay, I think that's it for the new. So now we're going to fly through a bunch of various important topics related to our state tests, some of which you might already know, but if you're new, these are very important things to be aware of, and if you're a veteran, these are things that are big reminders. So state policy regarding participation. 10-14N, this is the language that drives our summative assessment for reading, writing, math, and science. These are the statutes if you need them when communicating with parents or guardians or educators to let them know why we are doing what we do. Of course, there is federal legislation that backs that up. We are aware that there is occasional pushback, and this might be helpful for you to use in the district when it comes to situations like that. Okay, our office hours, as I mentioned earlier, starting on March 30th, we will be starting office hours. We will send you invites. There will be information on that. They're not mandatory to attend. In the past, we've had a core group of attendees who I think have benefited from them in the sense that we always throw some new stuff in, some reminders. It's never a dull 3 o'clock Thursday afternoon if you can make them during the testing window. Also, not to be confused with our office hours for Lost Links and SAT School Day. Those are done more on an ad hoc basis, so watch out for communication from Michelle Rosado for SAT and from Christy Alberino or Janet Stuck when it comes to Lost Links. Testing calendar. So 2023 testing calendar, the first thing you want to note on this one, February 1st to March 31st, our KELP window. As I mentioned, that's our new ALT ELP assessment. So watch out, that's coming very soon. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a few. That's the biggest note here. The only other thing we want to mention too is that the 2024 calendar was recently released late last year. For those of you that may be planning for the future, you can find it on our website, and I imagine one of my colleagues might even drop it in the chat here so you have the letter. In the past, our office has been somewhat sluggish on the release of these for various reasons. We typically have released the calendar the summer before the school year, which made things a little bit tight with time, so that is definitely out there. Oh, thank you, Dee. I see Dee drop that in there. Okay, so the TIDE PSIS data sync. What can I tell you about this? So first thing is that before we dive into sort of the smarter NGSS alt, the KELP connection, that for SAT College Board, remember that this does not happen on a nightly basis, and also TIDE exists in a different way. The College Board TIDE and our TIDE. Okay, so what about the TIDE PSIS sync? So district administrators, you may be a district administrator, you may not be on this call, but you should be working with your PSIS coordinators to ensure accurate info is reported in the PSIS Reg module and TIDE. If things are true in the PSIS Reg module, life is easy because things will be true in TIDE. During the summative window, we make these uploads every single evening. So if you make a change in TIDE one day, the next day you will magically have the information in TIDE. Again, as I noted, please note that the SAT TIDE is different. One other thing too, the question that has come up in terms of the IEP status and some, not confusion, but because of the new CT system, that we are pulling the IEP status from PSIS. That is where the source is this year. Okay, some critical facts for TIDE PSIS. Let's see here. First of all, we pulled all the special ed, free reduced, EL, military, family, and homeless values from the October-November collection, or the free zero collection in November 2022 to populate our PSIS registration. One thing that isn't in Reg is the recently arrived EL status in section 504. This is no different from previous years. If you had a student who was recently arrived or a section 504 student, you would indicate this on PSIS Reg. If this is foreign to you, I strongly suggest connecting with your PSIS person. They can help you out. June 2nd, that's when we will save the values in PSIS Reg for reporting. Going to the bottom row here, students who are repeaters should be tested. In other words, this means that if a student is retained and held back for a year, they would be tested again. If they aren't tested, they would simply be counted as a non-participant. And then the student's grade in PSIS is that grade in which they were given the test. So we often get the question like, well, the student is in 6th grade, but then in your student information system, which leads to PSIS and then to TIDE, the student's in 5th grade. Well, guess what test they're going to get? The 5th grade test. And then grade 11 skippers are not tested. These are students who, credit-wise, and we know this happens, move from grade 10 to grade 12 kind of overnight. And we know this happens, and we don't at this moment catch those students. So if you have students who fall into this situation, at the moment we don't do any follow-up on that, and we get that question quite frequently. Okay, if you have any status changes for a student, please refer to this. This will address the way students need to be changed in PSIS if there are status changes. We're not going to play out every scenario because it probably take us 10 minutes for each, but if you, and you will have these, I can guarantee you, have student status changes during testing. This is kind of a cheat sheet to present to your PSIS person and discuss some of these possible changes. Okay, shifting gears, TIDE designated supports and accommodations. What can I tell you about TIDE designated supports and accommodations? First of all, prior to testing, all embedded and non-embedded supports should be entered or uploaded to TIDE. And then if applicable, with school staff and students, it's important to practice these accommodations as well. If you have a situation where a student needs a special documented accommodation, petitions are due by March 1st, so be mindful of that time, and then refer to the assessment guidelines on the Connecticut Comprehensive Assessment Portal for additional resources. Janet and Deirdre are going to touch on this quite a bit. A lot of these points, in fact, all of these points, so if I'm moving quickly here, rest easy that we'll be kind of continuing these themes as we go on throughout the presentation. Then if you're uploading student supports to TIDE, the test setting template is available in Excel and CSV. You can use these templates to populate supports for students, including multilingual learners and accommodations for students per their IEP or their 504 plan. You can refer to the guide for information on how to do that. I see Christy dropped the presentation, helpful presentation. Oh, I see. She actually just as a reminder, if you're looking for the presentation, this presentation is in the chat. Thank you, Christy. And then the last thing on this slide is the IDEA indicator and 504 indicator must be set to yes in PSIS Reg before accommodations can be uploaded, saved, or accepted in TIDE. This is a biggie. So take a minute, take this one in. If they're not flagged in PSIS Reg, they're not going to stick. Okay, so the late breaking news of CT SEDS and TIDE. So what is happening now based on or when it comes to CT SEDS and TIDE? So designated supports and accommodations listed in a finalized IEP in CT SEDS will sync with TIDE prior to the March testing window. This will not happen before the February date for science, but this will happen before the date at the end of March. It's important that any changes made to a student's accommodation in CT SEDS are reflected or any changes made to accommodation in CT SEDS will then be reflected in TIDE on a nightly sync. So CT SEDS becomes really truth, and then once that is corrected, then it's uploaded to TIDE. Manual adjustments should not be made in TIDE. We're encouraging students to make those adjustments in the IEP or the 504 plan in CT SEDS so that it can be fixed in the nightly sync to TIDE. Again, I want to emphasize this notion of the finalized. You might be thinking, well, there's other situations. What if a student doesn't have a finalized IEP? Then how do I upload those, or how do I get those students into TIDE? We will be touching on that towards the end in our presentation. I believe I want to say slide 82 is a great cheat sheet chart that kind of lets you know where we are today when it comes to the sync. So before you start firing the questions into the chat, please check slide 82. Yeah, thank you, Christy, for confirming that. Okay, I'm going to pass the baton to Janet for the next couple slides.
Good afternoon. This slide is about the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility form. We requested that this form, identifying students who will be participating in the alternate assessment, be submitted for certain groups by December 23rd, and that included students who are English learners, who are dually identified, and students in grade 11. The reason is that this information would populate various rosters like SAT and Lost Links, allowing us to make sure that less errors occur for these students. We know that many districts weren't able to meet this deadline, so it's very important that your PPTs have these decisions made and that the form is submitted as soon as possible. And we'll be talking more specifically about that as we progress. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons that it's important for you to submit this form in a timely manner is that within the system, within the Cambium system, you can see in the student's profile the activation of the alternate assessment flag indicator. It will be indicated as yes, that the student has been approved and their form has been submitted into the system. This allows the teacher who will be administering the assessment access to the assessments itself in the Cambium system, the alternates. Otherwise, errors can occur and only the standard assessments are available. So you want to make sure that that happens. And if for some reason you cannot submit it by March 1st, then the teacher or you as the DA will go and call the help desk for Cambium, and they can walk through setting that flag once the form has been submitted into the data entry interface. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. So we have a pause here if you want to raise your hand and we can take any questions. We'd be happy to do that via audio. We can also just carry on as well. I know in the first session this morning, everybody, I guess at this point we didn't have any questions. We did in the chat, but I'll wait 10 seconds or so to see if anybody's interested. I know my colleagues have the fast fingers working today too, so if you want to ask chats, that's fine.
I think there is one raised hand, Abe, for Mary.
Yep. So Mary, you should be able to.
Yep.
You should be able to
yes,
talk into the mic.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay. So regarding the alternative assessment, right now we are currently uploading, as we have in the past, the application. Will that ever be synced with CT-SEDS? Is this just this year we will have to continue to submit that data entry?
Yeah. This for this, you're correct. We hope that CT-SEDS will blend right into TIDE, and those students can be recorded for the alternate assessment. But for this year, to make sure we catch everything, we're asking that all alternate assessment eligibility forms for grades K to 12 be submitted into the data entry interface.
Okay, thank you. And sorry if I missed you saying that, but I
no, I don't think I said it quite like that.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. All right, Alec, I thank you for the question, Mary. And Alec, I see you up now. You should be able to ask your question. Alec, you're
thank you, Abe. Oh,
yeah.
Thank you so much. Just wanted to clarify the interaction or to see if there's any more movement on the interaction between CT-SEDS and Frontline. I know in the previous slides you mentioned that CT-SEDS will be the form of truth for completed, finalized IEPs. As we are working to upload the accommodations from Frontline for those not finalized IEPs, has there been any more movement in that conversation to kind of figure out what will override what? Has any movement been made on that, I guess?
Yeah, so any students that aren't, so if you have a student that doesn't have a finalized IEP and you've, and I know Alec, we've talked about this, but if the student does not have a finalized IEP and you push that data up to TIDE, whether it's through a manual upload or an upload, that will stick. There's no reason why it will go away, and you will, if you anticipate those students will not be having a finalized IEP before testing, we recommend doing that like very soon. So I know there's this, it is sort of tricky this year. And, you know, when generally speaking, if a student does have a finalized IEP and it reflects pretty much what's in Frontline, it's essentially just gonna, overwrite is not the right word, but then it will believe what's in what's in CT SEDS with the finalized IEP.
Okay, so here's where I'm confused. In the previous slide, you guys referred to CT SEDS as the truth, the key data that's going to be passed. And I know we had talked about the idea of override or add on. And this is, I know we're just a larger district and this becomes a very key sticking point for us. And I just want to make sure I understand it 100%. So if, let's say, 10 accommodations move from Frontline for a student that does not have a finalized IEP, then prior to testing, that IEP does get finalized, and one accommodation is removed and another one is added. Will both things occur from that finalized IEP moment in CT SEDS? Will the accommodation that was uploaded previously from Frontline be removed because it is not in CT SEDS, and the new one that is added in CT SEDS be added?
So Tide is, yeah, nothing's changed on our messaging from like the last month or so where it's additive. So it will add that one addition. It will not take away the previous. So that's why we're recommending, and we in our in-person training and I know some district, I know Alec, you're from a big district, but some method of case management on these cases so you can kind of QC them to some degree. But again, so it's additive. That one will be added. The other one that you refer to as going away, that will not be taken away.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Thanks, Alec. Appreciate the question. Let's see, on deck is Jessica. Jessica, your mic should be good to go.
Thank you. I just had a quick question about the NGSS Science, the adaptive test. Can you share a little bit more about that, and what are their changes this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the adaptive test, I don't know if you caught what I said earlier. Nothing is changing with the blueprint. It's still, we're still using the same item pool. We're still using the same test items in terms of like, we're not doing any additional development. In fact, you could make the argument that the CAT could shrink the size of the pool. That's not the reason we're doing this, because it's more efficient at determining our levels. The only difference is now, as opposed to using this linear on the fly method where items were assigned in a random way per test. So if we were all 127, us were all in a testing room, chances are pretty good. I don't know if we would get 127 forms, but we would have multiple forms. Now it's the test is being structured in a CAT environment. And to be honest with you, we're a member of a we call it we sign a memorandum of understanding with about 10 other states that work with Cambium to do item development, and we're basically the last state that has adopted this, just because we wanted to be sure this is the right thing to do, and it's been blessed by our psychometricians as well as at Cambium's. I hope that was helpful. Thank you for the question. Jen Webster, I believe, is on deck. Jen, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Mine's kind of a PSIS question. When we've done our uploads this year for accommodations, we've noticed that we have a plethora of students who do not have their 504 or IDA indicator checked. And when we looked at PSIS, it's because the indicator checkboxes kind of appear twice in PSIS. There's a checkbox and then a drop-down menu, and the checkboxes only appear after the freeze, it looks like, but then they go away. They're only there for a short period of time. Is that, I don't know a lot about PSIS, and our PSIS coordinator couldn't answer this question either. Is that typical? Because now we're having our 504 and special ed department go back into PSIS, who have to check the IDA or 504 indicator in the checkbox to match the drop-down menu. So any accommodation uploads we've already done, we have a preponderance of students who it appears do not get accommodations because the checkbox wasn't checked in PSIS because the checkboxes were not there to be checked, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so Jen, thanks for the question. I don't know that, I don't have a response for you solid at this point. If you don't mind just sending me an email, because what I'd like to do is check on some of these SACIDs, and we might have to do some follow-up with my colleagues on the Kendra Shakir on the PSIS side. If you don't mind just sending me a note. I'm sorry, I can't.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Abe.
Yep. Yeah, I know there was a chat. I know we did upload the testing demographics in November based on the October collection, the November freeze. But yeah, if you could just give me a call, Jen, that would be, or send me an email, that would be appreciated. All right, I think, thanks for the questions. That was fun. We will have some more opportunities to answer questions in a little bit, but let's move on slowly but surely. So the next few slides, some of them are reminders, some of them is new information, all important though. So first thing is test security. These protocols really remain the same when compared to previous years. However, we would like to repeat them just to reemphasize the importance of these policies, especially for new DAs and or staff. So, and one of the reasons we are mentioning is because over the last few years, particularly the year where we had remote testing, there was a little bit of a relaxing of our test admin. And so we're just re-emphasizing these important things. So what are breaches of test security? They could be any of the following things. And in particular this year, we've noticed that the use of smartwatches, which appears to be really on the rise by students, is prohibited. Keep in mind that this list is not comprehensive, but this represents really the most common issues when it comes to test security. This slide is not a good slide because there's probably 200 words on it, but we just want to outline what's written in all of our TAMs and what is written in terms of communication about the seriousness of security and testing. As I mentioned earlier, things were slightly relaxed over the last few years due to remote testing, but this is a reminder of the importance of test security and proctoring. Please make sure to pass this on to your colleagues. One thing we want to flag you again, just so you don't get any surprises and you can properly inform your teams. And this isn't new news, but again, we've had questions about this every year because it's kind of like, ooh, what am I agreeing to here? The TA security confirmation page is back. We do this confirmation screen at the beginning of each test administration setup, and that assures that TAs have been made aware of the security measures in the TAM. This will appear again this year, and TAs will have to select OK to advance and begin creating a test session. This isn't new. It is critical that all school proctors, test administrators, school proctors and test administrators are trained locally and use the TAMs when administering the tests. So please let your staff know that this will be coming again. Okay, improprieties, irregularities, and breaches. These are really back again in the sense that we have maintained these three buckets of types of interventions when a testing intervention when something unexpected happens. We'll talk a little bit about each of these. So first one is a breach. That's a test security that poses a significant threat to the validity of a test. Then an irregularity, not as extreme. It's a test security incident that impacts an individual or maybe a group, and it might potentially impact student performance or test security or test validity. And then an impropriety is a low impact incident on an individual or group where there is no significant risk of potentially affecting student performance, test security, or anything like that. So, and there's a great resource if you look in your test coordinator's manual, which will be arriving towards the end of January. You can also find these on the Connecticut Comprehensive Portal. In Appendix G, there's a great chart that lists all these types. You know, what is an example of impropriety? What is an example of an irregularity? What is an example of a breach? And here's what you do in each of these cases. If you have a breach, call us, email us, text us, Instagram us, find us somehow, because we want to hear about these things immediately. You might have connections with my particular colleagues in the office that you communicate on a regular basis. Call them immediately if you have a breach. If you have an irregularity, file an appeal in the appeal system by the end of the day, likely, and then follow the instruction in the appeal system and keep records locally. And then finally, an impropriety. This is really a record. These should be tracked locally. We don't really need to know about them. You can correct them at the local level. They might involve the use of appeal or not. And again, Appendix G, if you're kind of wondering, well, Abe, it's nice that you're creating these buckets for us, but give us, put some meat on the bone in terms of what these things look like. You want to refer to Appendix G in the test coordinator's manual that outlines what each of these look like. So when you have an issue like this, usually we can fix the issue with an appeal. An appeal is something that is used in the TIDE system to either restart a test or reopen a test or reset a test. These are all the appeals. They are the same appeals that have been used for the last few years. Nothing, there are no new ones. You likely will not be using the last two very often. The first four, those are the more popular ones. You're reopening a test segment for a student who accidentally submitted the test, or maybe for one reason or another has to get back into the test. So these four are the most popular versions of appeals. Tips on entering appeals. First off, when you're unsure what to do, just call us. Let us know. Email the general inbox, call us at 6860. Christy Alvarino manages the bulk of our appeals, along with Deirdre Ducharme. If you have any questions, you can just email Christy directly. She's extremely responsive and she'll get back to you. If you're not sure what type of appeal to submit or how to do it or anything like that, she's really the point person on those. So if you have questions, just email Christy. Secondly, just be wise when you enter them. Make sure the staff member who's entering them is trained. We review every single one. We had over 2,000 appeals last year. Everyone had a look at. So we don't just approve them. It's not a rubber stamp. And then finally, provide information if necessary. So in the text box that's part of the appeal system, you'll have the opportunity to tell us a little story. The more you write, the better. I don't know what the character limit is on it, so don't write us a 50-page essay, but if it can provide some information to help us make the decision in terms of the appeal, please provide information. Don't just submit the appeal and write nothing, because what's ultimately going to happen is it's going to cause us to kind of scratch our heads, and we might have to get back to you and ask questions, and we actually like to hear things in that write-up. And then finally, just be aware that reopens and grace period extensions, which allow students to get back into testing, is not something that you just kind of give out just to have students go back in to make sure they're, double, triple check their work. That's if a student has a specific need to get back into a test. There are instances where maybe you find out after the test that something was really impacting the student that day, and you might have to get back into the test to allow them a fair shot at the test. But just simply a wide net of, we need all our grade 5 math students to go back in. We monitor that. We see what's going on, and we've seen this pattern in districts in the past, and we're just trying to guard against that. And then finally, the appeals process for an accommodation issue. If you submit an appeals process or an appeal for an accommodation issue, it's very likely that we're going to ask you for a letter on performance office letterhead, or excuse me, on district letterhead addressed to the performance office. And with this information explaining what has occurred in this incident, we will remind you once this comes in. Christy will likely send you a note that says, hey, but can you please provide this? And we ask that you comply and provide this just as quickly as you can back to us so we can kind of close the issue and move on. So just anticipate this. Okay, look at that. We're at another point where we can take a couple questions before Jen Cho from Cambium jumps on to tell us a little bit about the technical side. Are there any questions out there? Okay, I will take that as a no. I'm going to pass the ball to Jen. Jen, you want to handle the next section?
Yeah, so I'm going to spend some time going over the CAI systems. Like Abe said earlier, there isn't a whole lot of changes that anyone needs to learn or figure out for this year. We do have some enhancements, but all the systems are pretty much the same as last year, which is good news. We don't, we know everyone's busy. We don't really want people to have to take time to learn a brand new system or new features that are really complex. So I'm just going to go highlight some of the key things that we would want you to know from each of the systems and let us know if you have any questions. So moving on to the next slide. You may already all know this, but there is a Connecticut Comprehensive Assessment Program portal. This portal houses all the information relevant to the assessments. It also holds the links to all the different systems. So if you or a teacher are in need of any information pertaining to Smart Balance, CTAA, CTOS, NGSS, this is the place to go. We do send a daily email out from the portal of all the updates that were made to the portal. So if you're not part of that mailing address, you can definitely sign up on the portal. So just wanted to go over the secure browser. They are needed to do summative assessments with the exception of CTOS. The secure browsers for this year were rolled out in August. So if you have not downloaded the secure browser for 22-23, please do so. The ones from last year will no longer work. And this really only pertains to desktop browsers like Windows or Macs. If you're a school using Chromebooks or iPads, those are going to be using an app, and we will push out updates to the app if need be. But since most devices are set to auto update, there's not much you need to do in terms of downloading or uninstalling last year's browsers. So for desktop users, just make sure that you do have the 22-23 secure browsers installed. If you're already actively doing interim assessments, then you do have that installed and there's nothing more you need to do. Chrome. I always have a slide on Chrome because it is the most popular device used in Connecticut. Currently, we support versions 102 to 108. So if you have not locked down that version, please do so before the summative testing begins. Google tends to roll out a new operating system every couple weeks, and we actively do try to test it as quickly as we can so we can support it. But sometimes we run into snafus. We need Google to fix something on their side. So my recommendation, and it's actually more of a plea, is to just make sure you have those devices locked down before testing. If you do accidentally roll up to a new version like 109, we don't disallow it from testing, but it's kind of like testing at your own risk as we're actively testing it to make sure there are no issues. We do know it's kind of next to impossible to roll back to a previous version, so please make sure your devices are locked down before testing begins. I also mention this every year. I'm going to do so again, but please make sure your technology coordinators checks on the devices of the Chromebooks. They do not last forever, unfortunately, and Google does provide kind of an end of life deadline for when each of the devices will be discontinued. And when I say discontinued, I mean that Google will stop supporting it. So you want to check this page if you have devices that are going to have an end of life of 2020 4, something that you want to eye and make sure you do have replacements for those devices. As soon as Google stops supporting that device, CAI can no longer support that device for testing. So accessing the systems, in order to be able to access any of the systems, the reporting system, the test administration system, TIDE, you do need a user account. If you've been in TIDE before, all the user accounts from previous years have been rolled over, and we did reset all the passwords for security purposes. If you've been in the system since August 2022, you're all set. If you have not been in the system since then, you will need to retrieve your password in the login site. If this is the first time you're logging into one of our systems or you're using a new device or a new browser, you will be sent a passcode to verify that it is you, and you will need to enter that upon the first time you log in. We've got many requests wondering if we could remove that. It is something that we must maintain to be able to continue our security certifications that we acquire. And this is just because there is PII information and we need to make sure it's as protected as can be. So the first system I'm going to go through is TIDE. This is probably the most popular system. Almost everyone will be in the system, and you can see the different features that are offered in TIDE. You can add user accounts, remove user accounts for those who have left the school. You can verify the student demographic information, and like Abe said, this is a nightly sync between PSIS and TIDE. So the sync usually happens at 3 in the morning. So when you wake up and check TIDE, you should see those updates reflected. Adding student settings will be done in TIDE. Additionally, you can submit appeals, create rosters, order paper materials, and run participation reports. I'm not going to go into all of these in detail, but all this information is also in the TIDE user guide. A big takeaway from TIDE: if you have a student who needs to take a summative assessment, they need to be in TIDE. Without them being in TIDE, they cannot take a test. So that's one of the first verifications you need to do, is make sure all your students who need to test are indeed in the TIDE system. The second thing is, if you have a user, a teacher, or personnel who needs to proctor a test, they also need to be in TIDE as well. So without a TIDE credential, they also cannot access the system. So it's kind of the brain of our systems. Without access in TIDE, without us knowing they should be in the system, they can't do any kind of testing with us. Okay, one of the enhancements we did make for TIDE is that we are including the roster information in the student profile. So if you look up a student, you can also see what rosters they are associated to or what rosters they aren't associated to, and be able to make the updated changes that you need. I just want to go over the rosters quickly. They are not needed for testing, so you do not need to have a student in a roster to be able to test that student. They are needed for reporting for teachers. So if a teacher needs to access a report for a student, how they did and all that kind of stuff, they do need to be associated to a roster. So I always encourage people that probably right now, as testing is about to get started, I wouldn't worry too much about rostering. But like Abe said, score reports are supposed to go out in May, maybe even earlier. And that's probably when I would start making sure all your teachers are associated to rosters with students so they can see these results. TIDE participation reports. These are not new. These are also optional reports, but they will help benefit you as you're trying to monitor testing throughout the window. We offer 4 different reports. The plan and manage testing is probably the most granular one. You can determine, how many students took a test on a particular day with this particular teacher, if you want that kind of detail. The 2 reports I'm going to go into more detail are the test status code report and the test completion rates. And then the test sessions status report is a report for you to see in real time. If you're curious to see how many test sessions are in progress for a school, you can certainly go in and monitor that. It will just give you all the test sessions that are in progress, as well as how many students are part of that test session. So the test status code report, I would make this report your best friend. I have had districts come up to me and say they love it. It is a very detailed report. You can run a report by district or by school for a given assessment, such as Smarter Balance or Science. And what this report does is it pulls a report of every student who is eligible to take a test, either in Smarter Balance, and CTA, or NGSS. It will let you know what the status of the test is, whether it's been started, completed, not started, and if it was started, what time it was started, and if it was completed, when it was completed. This is a report that I think would be beneficial at the end of the window. If you know that the testing rates have been high, you've had maybe 90% completion rates, 95% completion rates, but you need to focus on and target the actual students who have not taken the assessment. This would be a great report to let you know exactly which students in what school have not started that test. The test completion rates. This is an aggregate level report, and this is key to know that this is only synced up once a day around 5 a.m. So if you run this report 10 times in a day, you're not going to get any more information than when you did it the first time. So I would run this report once a day. This is an aggregate report, meaning that it will tell you at the school level or district level the percentages of students who have completed a particular test. So if you run this report in the beginning of the window, you'll probably see low percentage rates, 5%, 10%, 20%. But when you run it at the end of the window, you want to see those numbers go up to 90%, 95%. And this will help you target which schools you may need to reach out to and say, hey, your test completion rate seems a little bit low. Do you have plans to finish this testing before the end of the window? The state and CEI will also run these reports as we get closer to the window, and you probably know that we will be calling you if we see these numbers lower than expected, knowing that we only have 2 or 3 weeks left of testing. One additional update we're going to make to this test completion rate is that you can also run it by combo, and this is going to be relevant to the math test because students need to take 2 tests in order to have an overall score. They need to take a math CAT and they need to take a math PT. So if you run a report by combo, you'll be able to see at an aggregate level the percentage of students who have taken both tests. And then you know they'll get a score. If they've only taken one and not the other, unfortunately, they will not be given a score. New thing in Tide is the Tide Forms. This is a great way for us to be able to collect information from districts and schools, be able to store that information and allow you to also know what decisions were made on a given request. We're going to test this out with 2 different pieces of information that we need. So if we go into the next slide, we're going to actually utilize this Tide Forms for both the ESR submission and the domain exemption for CALC. So what this means is that, and it's already actively live for ESR, is that there is a submission form in Tide for you to submit if you have a student who you think qualifies for ESR. Once you submit that information, it will go to the state for review, and they will either reject it, approve it, or pending if they need more information. So it's kind of like an appeal in that you're submitting a request and getting information more from the state. But we thought this was a great way to just be able to contain all the information in one place. You will always be able to pull that report too and take a look at it. And so it wasn't just something that you're emailing to the state or submitting to an SFDP site. It would all be in one place, and that's Tide. We may expand this in the future years for maybe test irregularity or other student settings that need approval. But for this year, we are just going to start with ESR and domain exemptions for CALC. So a couple TDS updates, test delivery system. First of all, you may have noticed on the interim assessments, we do have a couple more color contrast options, white on red, red on white, and yellow on black. They are available for the interim assessments and will also be available for the summative assessments as well. Another update that we've made, this is not test settings, so it's not anything that you can select, but we have added bounding boxes to the answer options for multi-select and multiple choice. So what that means is between each of the answer options, there is a faint box around it. We thought that would make things a little bit more readable, allow students to be able to know when an answer option has been completed and when the new one has started. And then the third update is for the science assessments. In the past, if a student needed to take the Spanish assessment, the periodic table was only offered in English. Now we offer in both Spanish and English. So if a student is seeing the item in Spanish, the periodic table will render in Spanish. And if the student toggles to the English format, the English version of the periodic table will show up. So that's it for our updates to the CAI systems. Please let us know if you have any questions. Even after this, contact the help desk, contact the state. I know a couple of you will email me directly, and that's totally great. I would love to talk to each of you to make sure that testing is smooth for your district.
Thanks, Jen. And before we carry on to our accessibility and special populations slide deck, are there any questions about anything that's been covered up to this point? Again, if you're interested in, we're obviously monitoring the chat. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand. If you've even asked one already, you're allowed to ask 2 or even 3. So feel free to raise your hand. Or not. Okay. Thank you, Jen, again. And let's see, I'm going to turn the ball over to Janet and Deirdre, who are going to cover accessibility and special pops.
Thanks, Dave. Next slide, please. So this is kind of our overview slide to let you know what we're going to be discussing in this section. Between Deirdre and I, we're going to cover the calendar for special considerations, who's eligible for designated supports and accommodations, some specific accommodation reminders, and again, those topics that were covered under the What's New section, we're going to hit them in more detail, and that would be CT SEDS, the new early stopping rule process, the new alternate assessment for English language learners, and which is incorporated into our alternate assessment system. And then, of course, we'll have opportunities for questions as well. So on our next slide, we have the calendar for special considerations. This is not new information. This has been shared with you in the past, but we also included the delivery method here. So in terms of the submission of the alternate assessment eligibility form, the deadline is March 1st, and that is delivered by the trained TEA into the data entry interface. And I want to have you make a note that when we say trained TEA in this instance, the only person that can submit this form is the individual who took the training for the CTA and CTAS. And that's because the individual who takes the training for the new KELP test, that's in a different system that doesn't sync up with Cambium. So that's why the particular academic alternate assessment individual would submit the alternate assessment eligibility form. Designated supports and accommodations should be entered in TIDE prior to the student testing. And we're going to cover the early stopping rule in more depth, but I wanted to make sure that you understand there's a role for the teacher and a role for you as the DA, and there are date specifics attached to that. These are entered into TIDE in the forms area that Jen just mentioned. We're also going to talk about special documented accommodations. These are accommodations above and beyond those typical or standard defined in the assessment guidelines, and those are due by March 1st. And we're also going to talk about the specifics regarding medical exemptions and the dates associated with each of those assessments. Next slide, please. Oh, next one. So our supports of students for accessibility for our assessments is a tiered system. So the first level, the entry level, is universal tools. And these are available to all students, general education students, English learners, special ed, and 504 students. Any of these students access these, and they are available through the computer as an embedded support or non-embedded provided by the test examiner. These are those things that we're most familiar with in working with our computers and technology that are available on the computer itself typically. We do encourage practicing with your students so they know where they are and how to access them. And this blog post that we have highlighted in this slide, which will be a link when you get the PowerPoint, has some really good tips and suggestions. The next level of our tiered system is called designated supports. And these are for our students, any student for whom the need has been indicated by an educator, or ideally a team of educators with parent, guardian, and student input, that the student is using regularly in instruction, and it's been determined that it's beneficial. We want those students to be able to access that on the assessment. And these are also entered in TIDE and are available in the practice tests. They also come as embedded supports or non-embedded provided by the test examiner. Next slide, please. Our highest level of support for student is called accommodations. These are available only for students with an individualized IEP program or a Section 504 plan. And again, those would be those students indicated in PSIS with those situations, and they are embedded or non-embedded, and they must also be activated in TIDE for the students to access them during testing. When I reminded you about the activation in the PSIS registration fields, when you're looking at your student profile, there are 2 boxes that will tell you if that has been pushed over from PSIS. In the TIDE student profile, you'll see IDEA indicator as yes, or Section 504 as yes. If that's how it looks in the student profile, then adding accommodations should be no problem. This is what we call our accessibility chart. It indicates all 3 of the 3 tiers that I just discussed, and whether the support or accommodation is embedded or non-embedded, and who is targeted for those. So this is kind of a quick go-to sheet that you can use and have handy at PPT meetings, so you know what options are available. But all of this is just high level. The document on the next slide is the assessment guidelines, which is essentially like our Bible in terms of supports for students and accessibility. And this is where each of these are described in detail and describes which grades, which assessments they're applied to, and how to access them. We also talked about our EL/ML students and the need for language supports. We have documents and resources for you to examine in terms of how to support those students in particular. And again, these are designated supports. So for these, the student does not require an IEP or Section 504 plan. And this page is linked once you get the PowerPoint as well. As always, we encourage you to provide opportunities for your students to practice using these tools, and the expectation is that they're familiar with them from their instruction. The practice test can be accessed very specifically with the student's SACID, or you can even have parents look at it so they understand what's happening too, as a guest. And the next slide gives you some information and links in terms of actual practice for your students for the Smarter Balance test in specific areas. For example, the Desmos calculator, or practice the tests, and you can have some scoring information. And I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Deidre for the accommodations reminders.
Great, thanks, Janet. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take the next few minutes to review some slides that capture some of the most commonly used designated supports and accommodation that support one or more basic student needs, accessibility needs. And these include supporting student vision, cognitive load, language, and motor skills. One of the common designated supports that is available to our students on the grade 6 through 8 Smarter Balanced Math Assessment is the Desmos calculator. And this is an embedded universal tool that is available on segment 1 and the math performance task for students taking the math assessments in grade 6 through 8, as I just mentioned. It's also available to our students that participate on the NGSS assessment in grades 5, 8, and 11. And built with universal design in mind, the Desmos calculator provides features and resources for students with a variety of accessibility needs. And as indicated on the slide, we have a variety of tips that teachers can use both during instruction and when working with students on the math practice task to give kids an opportunity to practice with Desmos so that they feel comfortable using this online calculator. It's our goal that teachers will take some time to model with their students how to use the Desmos tools. Enhancements on Desmos include graphs that are accessible to students who are blind, colors that have sufficient contrast, and adjustable font size settings for students that have low vision. So please take some time to share this slide with your teachers so that they can work with their students on the practice test prior to testing. And then again, for those students who may not be taking the math assessments in grades 6 through 8, but perhaps are participating on science, even for those 11th graders, this may be a good opportunity for teachers to be able to support their students' use of this universal tool. The next slide covers the speech to text designated support for students that may need language support or reader supports on Smarter Balanced Math, English language arts items, and the science stimuli and items. The text to speech is like I said, it's a designated support. It allows the text to be read to students through the embedded text to speech software. The student is able to control the speed as well as raise or lower the volume via the volume control. And text-to-speech is available as a designated support for test items, and it also is available as an accommodation, which I will speak to you in a couple of minutes. The next slide indicates how text-to-speech can support our English learners whose primary language or native language is Spanish, and in conjunction with Spanish presentation, which comes in the form of Math Stacked or Science Spanish Toggle. When text-to-speech is activated for these students, they can have the audio of the test stimuli and items read to them in Spanish. And again, this may be helpful for those students who are fluent in Spanish. Please refer to our non-embedded and embedded designated support brochure for English learners for more details on how to use these supports. And this slide is just a reminder as far as how to activate the supports, both text-to-speech and toggle in TIDE. There are a variety of reader options that are available to our students depending on their grade, their accessibility needs, and whether they have an IEP or 504 plan. So please refer to the reader options table, which is linked in this presentation. It's available on our website as well, on the portal. It will give you some detailed information on how to support your students with reader supports. But text-to-speech of the reading passages is considered an accommodation for students with a documented need. So these are students with an active IEP or 504 plan. Typically, these are students who have a print or visual disability. Oftentimes, students who are identified with dyslexia benefit from using the text-to-speech for reading passages. And they're not only using text-to-speech for passages, but they're using the text-to-speech to support all aspects of the online assessment. We have a decision guideline document as well as an documented evidence for the human reader form, which can be used locally as a screener to determine which accommodations may be most suitable for your students depending on their accessibility needs. Next slide. This particular image here is just a reminder as to how to activate the text-to-speech in TIDE, and it's also a reminder as to how our teachers should work with their students that are using this accommodation, or whether they're using the designated support text-to-speech of items. We want students to know how to control the functionality of the text-to-speech system. So students need to be able to turn this on for each individual item as well as item response. This isn't something that automatically functions as students navigate from one item to the next. It is something that needs to be manually activated by students. So again, take some time to have your students work with this, try this out on the practice test before they begin their summative testing. Now, used with students who have motor or processing disabilities, such as dyslexia, the text-to-speech, the speech-to-text accommodation supports written communication. So associated with any of our open-ended items, including the math performance task, open-ended items for reading comprehension, or the brief rights, for students that have the speech-to-text activated in TIDE, they'll see a microphone icon in which they'll select, and it allows them to dictate their written response into the system. Again, this is available for any open-ended item, and this is a great alternative for students who might be used to using other softwares such as Google Read Write or Naturally Speaking Dragon. This particular accommodation is built right into the test delivery system, and it does have some powerful capabilities. The next slide shows how to work with your students using the speech-to-text accommodation. Like I said, it does perform for any of the open-ended items. We want to make sure that students have an opportunity to try this functionality out to make sure that it does meet their accessibility needs before they take a summative assessment. And the feature does allow students to, or that the feature does auto-punctuate and capitalize as it transcribes a student's dictated response. So that's something to keep in mind, and you can remind your students that this automatically occurs as they're providing their response, which as a result, students will want to make sure that they proofread their responses and make edits accordingly before they move to the next item. Janet mentioned earlier that we have a variety of language supports for our English multilingual learners. One of these designated supports includes the translation glossary for mathematics. And for students who benefit from using a translation, we have a variety of languages that are supported in this feature. Students will have access to not only potentially their native language, but then an audio in which they can hear the transcription of a non-construct relevant term that's included within the item. So as indicated on this slide, the way this works is that if there is a gray underlining under a term within the math item, the student will essentially hover over that item, and then they'll have access to the translation in their native language, or they can hear the audio. We offer this in a variety of ways. So students can use the translation with their native language. They can have it paired with English, or they can have it paired with the illustration glossary. So more information about this designated support is included in the translation glossary brochure, which is hyperlinked in this presentation. You can also try it out on a practice test to see how it works. And when Abe navigates to the next slide, you'll see an image of what the illustration glossary looks like. And this is a support that not only benefits some English learners, but it may also benefit other students that perhaps have a learning disability or need additional language supports to access the assessment. So, or if you have an English learner whose native language isn't represented on the translation glossary, perhaps the illustration glossary is an option for your student. We want to make sure that this is not a distraction for kids. So again, if this is not a tool that kids are used to using during instruction, or if it's something that you try out on a practice test and kids seem to not benefit from it, then certainly then it's not designated support worthwhile using on a summative assessment. For students who have difficulty accessing the online Smarter Balance and Science assessments, we do offer large print and Braille test booklets. We want to make sure that you activate these accommodations directly in the TIDE system, and our district administrators should order the paper materials directly in TIDE. So the ordering is available anytime after January 27th. The district administrator can use the steps indicated on the next slide to actually go ahead and order those materials. And then finally, if you have students that need accommodations that go above and beyond those that we've already captured, on the accessibility chart, for instance, there's a section under the accommodations called special documented accommodations that for those non-standard supports that students need. These are situations in which the teacher more than likely is serving at a much higher capacity to support student access. So students who perhaps need a read aloud of the entire Smarter Balanced or Science assessment, students perhaps that need access to a human signer or lip reading, students that don't benefit from the embedded speech to text, but require a scribe or a bubbler on the assessment. So take a look at some of these options here. If you have students that need these accommodations per their documented IEP or 504 plan, please reach out to our office. The next slide indicates some reminders about how the request process works. We request that district administrators contact us to make this request. Please do not email us IEPs, 504 plans, don't include the confidential information, student first, last names, etc., within your emails when you're requesting this information. And we do have a secure mechanism for sharing this information using Cambium Secure FTP site. So as you call in to make these requests, we'll talk to you about your student's specific needs. We'll find out what your student is using in the classroom during instruction, and we'll make sure that we work with you and your teachers to have everything in place as far as approving accommodations prior to the test window. And then for a very specialized group of students that are unavailable to participate in testing because they're not attending school due to medical health and illness, we have a medical exemption process. And this process is for students that are not receiving homebound or hospitalized instruction, students that are medically unavailable to participate in learning and instruction, assessments, etc. We have different deadlines for these medical exemptions based on the assessment that you're requesting an exemption for. We have specific information included in the assessment guidelines. So if you're looking for more details about this, please refer to that document, and you can always give us a call. To apply for a medical exemption, it will require a sign off from your student's medical provider. So we will work with you in giving you the necessary forms if it turns out that you do have a student that qualifies. And if you have students that end up with a concussion or other medical emergencies, but the students are still well enough to attend school for some of the time, or maybe even for the full day, if you have students that need temporary accommodations, then please work with our office and we'll make sure that we have those approvals in place for your students. All right, Janet, why don't you walk our guest through the what's new for 2023.
Thanks, Dee. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about things that we mentioned under the what's new section, including the early stopping rule process, CT SEDS, and our new alternate assessment for English language proficiency. So next slide. So I just wanted to highlight a little bit about CT SEDS and the relationship to assessments. When your information in PSIS is specific to your students who have IDEA indicator or IEP plan and a Section 504 plan, based on the information provided in PSIS, it drives CT SEDS completion. Initially, you'll be asked questions or it will populate that the student is an English learner, and that will drive questions about an ELP assessment. And similarly, if you indicate that you're considering an alternate assessment, that will drive you to the alternate assessment eligibility form to be completed in CT SEDS. Please remember though, once you complete that alternate assessment eligibility form in CT SEDS, for all students, it still must be entered into the data entry interface for this year. Within the module for assessment is where you're going to have, driven by the student's grade, you're going to have options for various assessments. And that's where you're going to pick designated supports and accommodations from a drop-down menu that will be later synced into TIDE. But again, as we've mentioned in the chat, if you have the data available now for these students, you can use the Excel sheet or the comma separated value form to submit those into TIDE right now. It may be in your best interest to do that now to reduce the burden later and to ensure they get these supports in a timely manner. Next slide, please. So this is the slide 82 that we've talked about a little bit. This was provided to you in the student assessment newsletter. And we worked with the Special Education Bureau and our colleagues working on CT SEDS here to indicate to you the various scenarios that we are aware of in terms of getting your information into TIDE, whether the student is finalized in CT SEDS or not, or if you're still with a different vendor, and also those students who are English learner, multilingual learners, and your general education students. So take a look at this slide, please. Next slide, please. So I think I mentioned this before. So if you indicate in CT SEDS that you're considering the student for an alternate assessment, it's going to drive you to the alternate assessment eligibility form. Please remember, this now applies to students K to 12 because we are also capturing the new alternate assessment for English language proficiency. Next slide, please. So the reason we keep talking about this new ELP assessment is because it is under our alternate assessment system umbrella, which is in your area, because it is also provided through the Cambium system. So just like CTAA and CTAS, it fits into that category, and the expectations, we try to make them as similar as possible for these students. It applies to students K to 12. And oops, I'm on the wrong slide. Sorry. This is about the early stopping rule. So the KELP has now been added to our early stopping rule process, which means any student who does not have the ability to respond, possibly because they're still learning cause and effect. These are our students with significant cognitive disabilities, the subpopulation of that group. They may not be proficient or even entertaining assistive technology or augmentative communication yet. So they don't have a reliable way to respond. So you can't observe that. So these students, the teachers working with them in instruction would be aware of that and should consider the early stopping rule process if the student has been approved for the alternate assessment system. So this document has been posted and is available. The teacher would conduct what we call the student response check, which is 3 trials where they examine the student's ability to respond over 3 different days. And then if the student does not demonstrate a response in any of those situations, then they complete Appendix C, which is the attestation form, verifying their results and comments. And then signatures of the special education director and the district administrator for testing are obtained. And then the district administrator submits that form into the data, into tied forms, as we talked about earlier, to register that student to be approved for the early stopping rule. Once a student receives approval, they do not participate in CTAA, CTAS, or KELP. So that work is done. You as a district administrator can see that code for the early stopping rule in the participation reports that Jen talked about in her section. Next slide, please. So the new alternate assessment, we have a lot of information and communication out about that. The bottom line is the student would have to be in PSIS as an ELML in grades K through 12. They have to have an active IEP, which would reflect that they are have significant cognitive disabilities. The PPT would have confirmed through the alternate assessment system form, the eligibility form, which is the same one used for CTA and CTAS, that the student qualifies. And this is submitted into the data entry interface. As I said before, it's submitted into the data entry interface by the TEA who has been trained on the CTAA and CTAS. This is some more detail about the test itself. Again, the test window begins February 1st. Those teachers administering the KELP test must also have the TEA designated user role, but those who access only the KELP training do not have the permission to enter the eligibility form into the data entry interface. So that there's a little discrepancy there, but they have to have the TEA user role because otherwise they cannot get the KELP tests from the Cambium system. And you can see the link for the KELP training here. There was a letter provided in November about the specifics related to who should be administering this and the training, the related training. Okay, some resources specific to KELP on the Cambium portal is the KELP resources page, which includes practice opportunities for the KELP test, the operational field test, and the specific information. We did have our first office hours of 2023, which was specific to the LOS links and the KELP tests. I encourage you to take a peek at it. This is, there's also ancillary information now posted on the KELP resources page as well to help put the whole thing together. Next slide. Okay, Deirdre, I think I'm turning this over to you.
All right, so thanks, Janet. We're including an image of the 22-23 Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form. So this is the form that we've been talking about over the course of today's training. This is the eligibility form that your teachers and the PPTs complete to determine a student's eligibility for alternate assessments. And this is the form that will be used by the same team to determine if an identified English learner, multilingual learner with significant cognitive disabilities qualifies for an alternate assessment. If you look at the next slide, we've included a variety of resources that are available to our PPTs. And certainly these resources can be shared with families if they are thinking that that their child might qualify for an alternate assessment. But we've included FAQs, we have flowcharts, we have a variety of materials that help explain what alternate assessments are, how they're designed, who they're intended for, etc. The next slide is it's an again, like a resource, a quick resource that gives you a high level comparison of the different components of Connecticut's alternate assessment system. And you'll see that we've added the KELP to the alternate assessment system. So you can see the differences between how the tests are administered, who they're intended for, the differences in the assessment windows, etc. So this is just a high level comparison of the different alternate assessments. The next slide is a reminder for the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Science Assessment, rather CTAS. It's available for students in grades 5, 8, and 11 that qualify for alternate assessments. And unlike the Connecticut alternate assessment for math and ELA, science is not an online assessment. It's non-secure. It is a paper pencil test that's administered to students over the course of the year. And the beauty of it is that our teachers can embed and align the performance tasks, the CTAS performance tasks, with their curriculum so that there's a natural flow to when students are exposed to the performance tasks. We provided hard copy materials, test materials to our district administrators back in 2018. And the intent was that our district administrators would essentially be the holder of these materials, but then provide and have staff share materials over the course of the test window. If you need new hard copies, you can reach out to our office, let us know which grade you need, and we can make arrangements to have materials sent to you. But you can also download any of the CTAS materials directly from the portal. We include yearly updated student score worksheets. They should be downloaded by our teachers and then used for each individual tester. And then we also include the resource materials, performance tasks, the science test administration manual, etc. Everything's available on the portal. If you have questions about that, let us know. And the CTAS materials are hyperlinked to your slides. So when you have a chance to look at a PDF of this presentation later, you can view at your leisure. Right, next slide. We talked about the data entry interface quite a bit, especially in relation to having your trained teachers administer or submit rather the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form. As a reminder, teachers that administer the alternate science assessment will also use the data entry interface to submit their student score worksheets. So the window for that submission is March 27th through June 2nd. So we want to make sure that teachers get those student responses indicated in the data entry interface before the end of the test window so that we can score and then provide reports to you and to our students and their families. The data entry interface is also used for instances in which students are taking their assessments in either Braille test booklet or large print, or in the case that you have students that are out-of-state testers that are using the paper pencil materials. So after testing is complete for those students, you will want to assign someone locally in your district to transcribe those student responses into the data entry interface. Next slide. We've included a variety of resources, again, to support alternate assessments. Rather than the difference between this slide and the resource slide we had earlier is that this is less of a focus on FAQs for alternate assessments, but rather these are resources that help our district administrators work with their teachers to make sure that they have the right tied user permissions, that our teachers have access to the information they need to complete the required training, etc. We've included links to the alternate CTAA and CTAS assessing students who are blind, deaf, or deafblind. These materials provide additional guidance in how to make these assessments accessible to our students. So again, if you're working with staff that plans to administer alternate assessments, please share these resources with them. Next slide. And just to keep our district administrators in the loop, one of the important steps for our teachers administering alternate assessments is for them to download the directions for test administration in the TIDE system before administering the CTAA. The directions for test administration are secure. They are subject specific, so teachers will download both a math and an ELA DTA. They are also, grade specific. These are materials that include scripts. So teachers are going to read the scripts verbatim as published in these guidelines, and they're going to use this document or these documents in conjunction with the test administration manual for the CTAA. So there's a little bit of planning involved. We want to make sure that our teachers download this information before they administer their tests. Our DAs also have access to this secure information. So you're welcome to support your teachers in making sure that they have these resources, and you should have the materials, the DTA shredded after testing is complete. So whether it's at the end of the test window, or if you have teachers that are finishing up earlier in the window with testing, the materials should be securely destroyed. As a district administrator, there are a variety of ways that you can verify whether your teacher has the appropriate TIDE user permissions, whether they've completed the required training, etc. So refer to these slides that will help indicate where you should be looking on the TIDE dashboard to verify that your teachers have trained status. If it turns out that your teacher hasn't completed the training and the quiz, then your teacher won't have access to the data entry interface or the secure directions for test administration. So you may end up having to do a little bit of work with your teacher to make sure that they know where to access the materials and complete training. Next slide. And Jen did a great job highlighting the various reports that are available in TIDE so that you as a school coordinator, district administrator can monitor the test completion rates. You can also use these reports to monitor the submission of the eligibility forms for the alternate assessments, as well as identify those kiddos who are approved for an early stopping rule. So as we work with our Cambium to screen the submissions for the early stopping rule, Cambium will go ahead and apply an early stopping rule code for those students. So keep in mind that you can use the reports throughout the window to track these different scenarios. And we're in the home stretch. This is now an opportunity for you to ask any questions, any lingering questions, and there may be some unanswered questions in the chat that we need to address.
Deirdre, I have, I think we've been trying to get most of them. So I do, there's one in particular that I think several folks asked regarding, so this would be entry of accommodations into TIDE, and the IEP indicator is not set, or the 504 indicator is not set in TIDE. And in order to enter that the accommodation, you need to have that set in your PSIS reg. So you can, and I think the comment in the chat is like, I can't change it, and it's because it'll actually be grayed out, and you could you could try all kinds of things and you're not going to succeed. The way to do it is basically go into PSIS, make sure it's in PSIS, and then you can either manually or enter them online.
And Aid, to that point, this is a good reminder that any of the student demographic information in TIDE cannot be manually adjusted. So if you notice that there's an incorrect spelling or date of birth or whatever it may be, those changes specifically have to be made in PSIS. And then once the change is made, you'll notice the update once the sync happens, which is nightly. So sometimes the change may, it's not reflected in real time, but just make sure that if you notice there are errors, you'll have to have those corrected in PSIS.
Thanks, Dee. Cheryl, I think you had your hand raised, and I think I know I just enabled your mic. Did you have a question? Maybe not.
Abe, this is Christy.
Yep.
If folks put in an alternate eligibility form in the DEI and it has been reported and the flag doesn't show up, do they just contact the help desk and have the flag turned on?
Christy, I can answer that. If you have concerns that that alt flag has not been indicated in Tide, you can always reach out to our office and inquire about that. But our colleagues at Cambium do manually activate this on a weekly basis. And so let's say you entered the form, the eligibility form this morning, and then you log onto the dashboard and you see that the alt flag indicator is not on. Don't panic, because it's not like an automatic switch. They're like I said, we have our colleagues do this manual entering. So I would, in that case, I would sit tight, and then, but certainly if an eligibility form was submitted like a week or 2 weeks ago and it's not reflected on your student's dashboard, then call us. You can call the help desk. And we'll do a couple of checks to make sure that that form is indicated in the DEI, and we'll go ahead and turn that on. And I think CAI will be making more frequent updates with the alt flag as we are closer to the March 1st deadline.
Yeah, it's not a manual. We do an upload, but we do it once a week. So if you don't see it within 2 weeks, let us know. But right now, because there is no testing going on, we are just doing it once a week.
Thanks, Jen.
I'm going back to Cheryl. Cheryl, I don't know if you your hand was up, and I enabled your mic again. If you had a question, feel free to ask. Okay, maybe it's just an errant hand. All right, any other questions that we might have not got we answered in the chat, or anything else that comes to mind from you? We're not in a rush to get off, so we will. I'll give it a few seconds here if anything comes to mind. One thing, actually, while if you're sort of stirring over any questions, I don't believe I mentioned this workshop. I'm sort of mixing up the workshops now. We owe you a few things. We owe you the teacher training. We owe you the PowerPoint. And we also owe you the TAMs, which are being mailed by the end of this month. So we should see the first two sometime next week. We'll email all DAs, as well as, if you're not a DA and you're on this workshop, we'll pull the reg list and we will send it to anybody who is at these workshops. So look out for that stuff. We know you all rely on that stuff to sort of transfer the knowledge down to your colleagues, so that's on its way. What was the last chat? Well, will we get a, yeah, if you want, sure, we can put the recording. What we'll do is, likely this will be recorded or is being recorded. We'll package it up in a nice way, and we'll include that in that email. Thanks for the organizer. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. Okay, I don't want to hold on here for no reason, so we appreciate all your patience. Thank you to the CSDE awesome team and the Cambium awesome team. Cheers to everybody. Cheers to you all in the district. We wish you luck and good fortune during testing. If you need anything, you know where to find us. We're here to support you, and have a good afternoon. We appreciate you. Thank you.
That's great. I echo Abe's words. We appreciate your partnership, your collaboration, your hard work and due diligence. So thanks for all you do, and we wish you a great test season.
Thank you.